Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Discussing a Murder. This is Jeff Jones. With me today is the partial panel. So let's get right to it and meet and greet and start from the top and say hello, Jack. How are you doing today?
Hello, Jeff, and all my panel members and the live chatters. Brand new episode today. Finished one the last time. Unbelievable. It was a party and a celebration. I'm kidding. So yeah, ready to get started on where are we on? Episode 8? Is that where we're at?
That's right,
Yeah,
episode 8.
there we go. Hey, I'm ready to get to it. Let's do it.
Awesome. Dr. Silkman, how you
Hey
feeling?
Jeff. Hey Jeff, I'm doing well, and I'd like to say hi to everyone on the panel. It's great to be here, and welcome everyone in chat. I can't believe we're starting a new episode, and as Jack61 said, let's get on with it. Fantastic. Thank you.
Well, let's get on with it and on to the next. Those are the words that we hear a lot from Big Jeff. How are you doing today, Big Jeff, or this evening? How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. I'm doing great. I got to figure out why my camera's so dark. It's not normally this dark here, but we'll get that resolved by the end. And boy, remember the last episode was titled Item FL. And boy, wasn't that just a real series that just shows the corruption of the state, just the sickening and disgusting piece of planted evidence that was. And yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into this one. It's good. It's good that it's a new one, but I'm positive that the corruption doesn't end. So let's get to it.
In a 1,272-page motion for post-conviction relief, Kathleen Zellner lays out her evidence, fighting for what she says is justice for Stephen Avery.
Zellner argues the finding of this new evidence means Avery is entitled to a new trial.
Kathleen Zellner did not return phone calls, instead tweeting 10,909. It's the number of days Avery has spent in prison, including an overturned rape conviction in which he spent 18 years behind bars.
The Wisconsin Department of Justice says it is confident Avery's conviction will stand. The state believes, as with Mr. Avery's prior motions, this one also is without merit and will be rejected once it is considered by the court. The department continues to send condolences to the Halbach family as they have to endure what they call Avery's ridiculous attempts to relitigate his guilty verdict and sentence.
Post-conviction filings are not an attack on the victims or the victims' families, and we shouldn't look at it like that. These are legal venues that are built into the system, that are built into the law, and they are designed to ensure that the conviction has integrity. And it has integrity so that post-conviction, someone that has been convicted has the opportunity to present evidence and say, you got this wrong, you got this part wrong. And if we don't have those safeguards, then we lose the integrity of the system.
That's crucial. We did a series, remember Jack61, a while back, in which we looked at the misgivings of Dr. West, who used a bite mark analysis.
Indeed and without doubt.
Indeed and without doubt. And there were several African-American men, one of them who was condemned to death. And it was found out later on that they were all innocent. And the comment by Dr. West still made me feel very, very chilled to the bone when he said, "Oh, well, no harm done. We can always open the door and let them out." Isn't that a remarkable, Jack61?
And like it was no big deal.
Like it was no big deal. These people had been accused of a violent rape and murder of 3-year. I think they were 3 years old. 3 or 6 years old. They were very, very young girls.
Right.
And imagine being tainted and tarnished with such a horrible, horrible crime, only to be found that they were innocent, totally innocent. And that's why, I really put stop to what Brad Schimmel just tried to do. It really is a blight on the legal justice system. There are people who are wrongfully convicted, and that's why the system is in place to ensure that proper justice is done.
And, I'm going to pile on a little bit myself. And this is really for, all this discussion you guys have just talked about. And I look at this the same way, but I try to put myself back to that jury in 2007 and try to understand everything that we know that they never got to see or hear. And God damn, the pile is massive. Stuff that the lawyers didn't get because Kratz withheld it. Right? So how can these jurors, and even, poor old Judge Willis that got trampled by Kratz, how can these people come to a righteous verdict when there's just a whole pile of stuff that says, no, you got the wrong guy. Something else happened here totally. You got a prosecutor that's inventing this whole fucked up scenario to sell you on it so they can convict him, end this lawsuit and convict him and get him back in jail. Oh, and by the way, we don't really care, but we got his nephew too. He helped us because we had to have him get back in that property to really screw him. Unreal. So the post-conviction process is extremely important in our system of justice because our system is only as good as the people running it. Thank you.
Yep, 100% agree there, Jack 61, and also Big Jeff. You need checks and balances. And, it's rather ridiculous that now in 2023, many researchers, I know the Foul Play team and other researchers are totally dismantling the case that the state put forward. And the scary thing is, and Jack 61 hit the nail on the head, a jury can only reach a verdict on what was presented in court. And we mustn't forget, what is presented in court is regarded as the truth. So hence, the bar is set very, very high for Stephen and also for Brendan Dassey, that in order to overturn their conviction, they've got to come up with something huge. Kathleen Zellner has been trying and using her own money in order to find avenues to get at least a new evidentiary hearing. The state, under all circumstances, is trying to protect the verdict. And the question must be, why? Why are they so persistent? What are they scared of?
It's a political bomb to me, Doc. And Big Jeff, just before we continue on, there's a newer Reddit topic in the MAM sub that somebody was talking about Zellner's filings and so forth and so on. And you've heard of, I know you've seen the Reddit handle Dogs Sniff My.
Yes, I have.
Yeah. Of course, they started piling on and blah, blah, blah. Zellner's lost every round, blah, blah, blah. But he wants to, I remember very well 2016, 2017, especially when Kathleen, made a lot of these filings, and they were righteous and they were strong, especially on the scientific part. I can't say so much about the theory part about who did what and how that came, but the scientific stuff is dead on. It's correct. But because of the procedural, this technicality, as you pointed out last time, this technicality, there was such talk back then. Well, you don't want Avery getting out on a technicality. That's just bullshit. Well, I really didn't. But now, I don't care. I don't care how he gets out. If it's a technicality, fine, get him out. Because of what they do.
He's in on a technicality.
Right, this procedural bar shit. I can't stand it. I absolutely just cannot stand it.
Well, go ahead, Doc.
I was going to say, sorry, Big Jeff. At the end of the day, no one really wants to find out the truth. No one wants to come forward and say, okay, this is what really happened. And it's rather egregious that Kathleen Zellner is using her own money. She got a panel of experts, and the science, as Jack 61 said, is solid. Okay, we've all gone over it. We've tried to pick it apart, but the scientific investigation that our experts have done is solid. These are world-renowned experts. They're not just people with a fake degree or with no sort of basis, scientific basis for their analysis. These are the best of the best. And if each one of them is coming up with new forensic evidence, I think people need to start to listen. To me, what is of great concern is the complete and utter silence from the Halbach family. To me, that is just as disturbing. Just an opinion, of course.
I used to say when we first started doing the Fall Play podcast, it seems like eons ago now, but I couldn't even tell you how many years ago that is now. I used to say on every podcast that people who don't have anything to hide don't continue to hide things. Why is it that we can't have the RAV to test? Why is it that Judge Angie shut that down? Why is it that we couldn't test the bones? Why is it that we couldn't get a DNA sample returned on item A23? Why is it that we didn't find what we expected to find on item FL? The science is there, and people who say who are arguing that this is ridiculous, really, they really need to open their eyes to what's really going on here, because it's a cover up of epic proportions.
Yeah, who initiated Bonegate September 2011? Was it the state? Called Halbach, say, hey, look, we got an opening here, because they wanted those bones given. They wanted them out of evidence for whatever reason. Hey, we got some, remains here of your daughter. You want to pick that up? I tried twice to find that out, and the DOJ would not. They didn't say that. I asked for all communication between the state of Wisconsin and the Halbachs in 2011, and they just denied my request. They didn't say it didn't exist. Usually, if there's nothing, they'll tell you that there's nothing, blah blah blah, in return for your request. This, they just flat denied it. So that tells me there was communication of some sort. And I want to know who initiated it, because it's important. Second part of that, yeah, go ahead, Doc.
No. Keep going, Jack 61.
Well, the second part of that is that I guess maybe this is more of a minor detail, but the truth is we don't really know what happened to those remains, because the funeral home didn't sign for them. There's nothing there. So we don't know if they actually got them or not, or they just, did whatever with them and got rid of them, just got them out of the evidence.
Criminal injustice, man. Isn't it? It just screams criminal injustice to me.
Of course it does.
Unbelievable.
It does.
It's a violation of Judge Willis's order to preserve biological evidence.
That's right. 100%. That's 100% correct. And
they have to come up with these bullshit rulings that say, oh well, it would, even if you did test it, and even if it came back to be Teresa's, it wouldn't have mattered anyway. Well, that's I'm a little bit angry at Kathleen for not pursuing a federal appeal based on some of the rulings that we got from the court. They're just crap. These rulings that we're getting from the court, they're they're precedent that could be used against you. That's the problem, right? They could say, well, hey, this doesn't matter. And when you hear things like that, you have to be worried about how that corrupts the whole system of justice, period. Just like Jack was alluding to for the other examples.
Yeah, 100% correct. And they know what the laws are regarding the preservation of biological evidence, because as we all know, new techniques are always around the corner. The field of forensic DNA analysis is forever changing. There are more sensitive techniques that come out almost on a weekly basis. And the mere fact that non-anthropologists, right, Jack 61, went through all the plastic bags and they pulled out so-called human bones, and then they gave them back to the Halbach family via the funeral home, is just simply mind-blowing. When Mr. Kratz stood up in court in front of a judge and a jury and essentially said, hey, we don't want to talk about any type of bones that were found in the Manitowoc County gravel pit. They're not pertinent to the case. But quite clearly, through Dr. Eisenberg's report, there were cut, burnt human bones that were spread out over a very large area. Quite clearly, and Jack 61 will back me up on this, the crime scene was, half a mile, 2 miles away from Stephen Avery's burn pit. It quite clearly was not what the state presented. And then to try and counteract Kathleen Zellner by saying, well, how do we know that your client i.e. Stephen Avery, and by inference, Brendan Dassey, didn't go all the way to the Manitowoc County gravel pit and dispose of cremains there. So in other words, the state is actually quite happy to blame Stephen and Brendan for everything because they've got no answer. And remember Jack 61, when Mark Wiggett was questioned on the stand about, well, do you have any evidence against my client? And the only thing he could say was they had 5 days to clean up. This is the type.
He needed a cold day in Wisconsin ear slap.
Correct. This is how ridiculous this case has become.
Well, you know what the thing is that there are certain statements that have a smell test, right? And the smell test for the bones being found off site is the following: shouldn't somebody in Wisconsin, whether it's the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office or whether it's the Wisconsin Department of Justice, be interested if there are cut up human remains somewhere, no matter where they are? So I suppose, you could argue that if they're Teresa Hallbacks, it doesn't matter to the case, and that's their argument. But the fact is they're human remains, and they're cut up and they're burned. Who is that person? If it's not Teresa Hallback, who is it? Shouldn't you have some intellectual curiosity if there's a murder that has occurred?
That's exactly the point right there, Big Joe.
And they don't even have that, right? Nope. There's not even intellectual curiosity about who that is, because they know goddamn well who it is.
But the actual kicker, sorry guys, the actual kicker here is that according to Dr. Leslie Eisenberg, she had examined all of the cremains, every one of them, from all the locations that they were found. And her conclusions were there were no duplicate bones and all the cremains had come from one individual. So she's implying that all of the cremains that they found belonged to Teresa Hallbach. Now, don't you think you want to have that intellectual curiosity to determine whether those cremains are indeed from one person and one person only? Because as Big Jeff alluded to, are you trying to tell me that the state wasn't interested? This could have been a dumping ground for a serial killer. These cremains could have belonged to someone else's loved one that's been missing for years. There was no intellectual curiosity. There was no attempt to try and extract DNA from those cremains, whereas now we have much more sensitive techniques that it's possible to either isolate genomic DNA or mitochondrial DNA from those cremains to determine the origin of those bones. It really is a real head scratcher that the detectives, the law enforcement officers were finding, as Jack 61 will mention in a second, buckets of bones, and there was no attempt to identify whose cremains they belong to. It simply is shocking.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to bring up. That phone call that Lieutenant Kelly Sipple made to his captain at Calumet County. And he immediately starts making excuses and speculatory things. Oh, well, they scooped up blah, 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 left some there, and brought the rest over here. And that was the end of it. There was no, hey, look, we got a bunch of bones here. We need to get the corner right here. That is supposed to be the first thing they do. The first thing. But that's not what they did at all. They completely ignored policy, state law, I think. Or at least regulation. I don't know if it's law or not, but it might be.
At least procedure for sure, right? Accepted procedure.
Oh, yeah. I do. Actually,
I mean, because you want to know. You want to know whether they've been sort of thrown out. That would actually be inculpatory evidence. They say, well, he went out and they picked up the bones and they threw them out. Well, you can tell whether they were kind of dumped out, whether they were tossed out of a bucket like you might pour water out. It matters how they lied it, or were they sort of in situ, as you might find. What we want to know the answer to those questions, and the defense deserves the answer to that question, right? And so do the people.
And if it's somebody else that's not Teresa, that family needs to know too, and that person needs to be, whatever happened to them needs to be justified in our system of justice, as it were. But that was not even a concern. He wants 60 more state troopers out there to scour that court to go pick everything up. Now, that's a huge red flag for me. After everything is said and done, the following day, they brought Clauser in, the coroner, after everything's fucking done. It's absolutely unacceptable.
This, Jack 61, you hit the nail on the head. This is a consistent operating procedure by the law enforcement officers that were involved in this case. Everything is done in reverse. Everything is done after the fact. And we mustn't forget that when any type of bone is found anywhere, in a clandestine burial site, in a burn pit, even in a burn barrel, it's tools down, boys. You call the coroner comes in, the coroner brings her own experts, including a forensic anthropologist. And the question must be asked, why was none of this done? Why was no coroner called? Why was no forensic anthropologist called to examine the remains, to do a proper grid search, to have proper crime scene documentation with photographs, with videos, with a grid? You find none of that. And to think that Erdl made that comment, remember Jack 61, I don't take photographs of a scene that's obviously been altered.
That's right.
I think he was giving a subtle hint that what even he saw, he could not believe. And I think Jack 61, that call that you mentioned about Sipple, didn't he say there was only a small pile of bones in Stephen Avery's burn pit? How did he know there was a small pile of bones in Stephen Avery's burn pit? Right? How did he know that?
Yeah, that's right. Again, he just made this gigantic leap that Stephen and Brendan did all this. Yeah, to me, it's just a gigantic red flag. Is this how they operate in Calumet and Manitowoc County? Is this what
It's
they
scary.
do? Is this
Yeah,
it is scary.
it's scary.
Very scary for the people that live there. And you said it. The coroner gets called in. They bring in their own people. Everything gets locked down. You guys get the hell out, or you go to another area where there are, none of this. You work on something else. We'll take care of this. And that should have happened also. Here's another thing. There's a report. I don't know if I sent it to you, Doc, or not. I was just skimming through some of the Zellner exhibits from the past, and Erdl's got a report, and in this report they're numbered, and he's talking about Cuss Road, and they've come back and said it was an old peat moss bag and a rotten pallet.
Yes.
Erdl said they didn't find anything. That's his words. And actually, Jeff, I'll send this to you if you want to include it in this episode that we're doing. Number 6 says they found nothing. So which is it?
And also there was also mention of a stump as well. So these guys are just pulling things out of the air. And you're correct, Jack 61. What you find in this case, right throughout this case, is a total lack of consistency. People are making comments that don't stack up, and there's no form of corroboration. And I bet you that none of these guys involved in this case ever would have thought that thousands and thousands of people would have gone over those documents with a fine-tooth comb. And hence, that's why MAM is so important, because it exposed the shenanigans to a wider audience, to people from all around the world. And now they're reacting very, very strongly against that.
The former district attorney who helped convict Stephen Avery of Teresa Hallbach's murder in 2005 says the latest motion for a new trial by Avery's attorney is, quote, a shame. Avery's attorney accuses prosecutor Ken Kratz of ethical violations in fabricating evidence.
Ken Kratz joins us from CrimeCon, the first ever crime convention there. Ken, I'd like to get your reaction to those documents that were just filed on Wednesday claiming new evidence and suppression of past evidence to now try and free Stephen Avery. What do you say to that?
Kathleen Zellner, the attorney for Stephen Avery, had a really difficult position. She had gotten some test results back that didn't support their position very well at all. So really all she had left was to blame others for the crime. Unfortunately, she chose the ex-boyfriend of the victim in the case, placing the blame on him without any kind of evidence at all. And for the family and for those of us that work so hard not only to get the conviction but to get some kind of closure for the family, we think it's absolutely deplorable.
You know, it's just more of that leaning on the family stuff that just drives me. I mean, I already kind of commented on it about how this post-conviction motions are not an attack on the family. It's a built-in part of the process. I guess if they're going to keep repeating themselves, I'll just keep repeating myself and keep saying that this is part of the process. It's not an attack on survivors. It's not an attack on people's families. And when you frame it like that, not only, number one, are you being disingenuous, but number two, you hurt the integrity of the process. I'll just keep repeating myself.
That's all they've got. They're trying to play that emotion card. It doesn't evidence to be damned. They don't care. They're playing that emotion card for the hall box.
You know, and it's true that you guys make a really good point. I've seen a couple of other trials where a prisoner has been sitting in prison for 20 or 30 years and they finally got released because forensic evidence have proved that they weren't the person who had committed the violent assault or rape or murder. And you know what's incredible? How the parents of not the potential suspect, but the parents of the victim went up to the person who got exonerated and hugged them and said, "I'm sorry. I knew it wasn't you all along. I had my doubts." Now, why can't everybody have a clean slate and say, this is not an attack or an embarrassment on the victim's family? This is to find the truth. This is to find the truth. If you take that away, then I'm sorry, corruption is going to reign supreme. Kratz clearly does not want his work examined, re-examined. He doesn't want someone to pick holes in his investigative team, right? Everyone involved in this case is now under the microscope. He does not want that level of attention because remember, if the verdict is overturned, that means that the lead prosecutors, the investigators, the crime lab had made serious errors, and no one wants that on their book. But if you don't have that level of scrutiny, it means that you're going to continuously put innocent people in prison like what happened to Stephen in 1985. You cannot repeat the same mistake twice. Surely not, guys.
You know, talking about these investigators, and we've talked a lot about this, a lot of the peripheral goings on that happened in this case. You know, another thing that, and there's a bunch of these that I could tell, but one of the most morally and ethically bankrupting things they did, and they did a lot, was after Brendan was arrested, you know, they leaned on him really hard, especially about drugs, and tried to, you know, say he was a drug addict and sold drugs and all that. And they actually went to Barb and told her that Brendan was an addict and he was doing and selling drugs. And they had done a blood test to prove it. I'm not kidding. That's what they did. And she's like, of course, she talked to Brendan. He's like, they haven't done any blood test. They haven't done anything like that. That's the kind of people. That's the kind of people that were in charge.
But not only that, guys. This is what happens when the law enforcement has carte blanche and can lie and can fabricate and can come up with stories that make no sense and have got no basis in reality. And remember, guys, we have a lot of experience. We've seen a lot of the documents. We've seen a lot of the videos. Law enforcement, what they were trying to do, and I believe they were successful, was causing divisions within the family, right? They were causing unrest by lying directly to them, by threatening them. And as a consequence, what they were doing was they were isolating Stephen to be by himself, to have no support. And that you must think this has got to be the most strangest case you have ever seen. And I agree. And the reason why they're so persistent, the reason why Brad Schimmer was so persistent going after Brendan Dassey is because this is a hot political football. You have two people who I personally believe are innocent, who are now being held as political prisoners because overturning their verdicts is going to be hugely embarrassing and career-ending for a lot of people that were involved in this case. So, guys, there is a lot riding here. And that's why the only avenue they can have is to block Kathleen Zellner legally at every turn possible.
The post-conviction petition is sort of a guide for trying to get the case back to an evidentiary hearing. So what I've done is I've set up the structure that I want to work within, but I never stop trying to find new evidence. I'll be doing that when I'm going to the court for, the evidentiary hearing. We'll be doing that during the evidentiary hearing. We'll be doing that after the evidentiary. If we don't win at the evidentiary hearing, we will just keep going. Because when you have somebody who's innocent, you don't just sit back and say, well, that should do it, until you've got it completely figured out. And that's why I focus so much on who committed the crime. A lot of attorneys think that's crazy. They'd never do that. But you have to be that committed to someone's innocence and to the unfairness of the trial they got.
If Kathleen Zellner and her team were not as persistent as they were, Ryan Ferguson will still be sitting in prison and rotting away. Just think about that for a moment. What she had to do to get Ryan Ferguson, who was not even at the crime scene. There was no forensic evidence against Ryan at all. And also the other guy who had that dream. No forensic evidence at all. Ryan Ferguson would still be in prison. And it goes to show how much the system is stacked against someone who's been wrongfully convicted. It's almost impossible to get out of prison. Why? Protection of the verdicts. And as you can see here, the opposition against Kathleen Zellner and what she's trying to do is phenomenal. I have never seen this level of objection against an attorney working for her client.
If we use the logic of Ken Kratz on top of that, Dr. Silkman, Ryan Ferguson shouldn't have done his post-conviction motion because that was an attack on the survivor's family, right? That's what I'm saying. Like, how ridiculous of a thing to say. Yeah.
100% correct. You see, this is the problem, right? Once the human element becomes involved, all logic flies out the window. So the argument, and Ken Kratz made this argument, right, guys, many times during the court. He said, I had to do what I had to do because I had a dead girl on my hands. In other words, Teresa Halbach was brutally murdered. We are going to put someone in prison for that crime. Who is the easiest person that we can pick on? Stephen Avery. Who's the next easiest person we can pick on? Oh, look at that. Brendan Dassey just said all these things, right? So therefore, they felt it was their duty to put someone in prison. They don't care whether they were innocent or guilty. Remember what Stephen's father said. Remember, he said that Kacerik said, I don't care whether you did it or not, you're going to prison, you're going down for this, for the sexual assault on Penny Bernstein. So we have a victim We have a suspect, and we're going to put that person in prison because it appeases everyone in the community. Everyone is saying, oh, great, they committed this murder. We've put them in prison. Thank you. Nothing else to see here. So everyone feels safe. But what happens when the person who committed this crime is still free? Jack 61. Remember what happened in 1985 when they didn't look at Gregory Allen. Gregory Allen was free for 10 years to commit rape and all sorts of other crimes for 10 years. That is shocking.
The thing to keep in mind and what courts analyze on these post-conviction cases is what did this jury hear? What were they told? Because that's the evidence that they convicted him on. And so that's the evidence that we're trying to undo.
So they're stuck. Backtrack and say it went through some, fleshier part where it maybe wouldn't pick up bone, but might still have her DNA.
Yes, we can win this. We can get the conviction vacated on this fragment, but I want to actually see if we can create a similar looking fragment. So we're going to try to shoot through the exterior of the garage through red paint with some 22 pistols. And then I want to take those fragments to microtrace because I think we'll pick up wood in those and we may pick up the red paint. So then we'll know how they got it. When I
if I could just interrupt. Oh, go ahead, Jeff. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Big Jeff. Go ahead.
It was good of the doc to bring up Brian Ferguson, which is one of the people that Kathleen Zellner has exonerated. But she's up to what, 22 now, or is it 23 people exonerated? Do you happen to know, Jack, what the number is? It's once it gets to be on a certain number, I guess it doesn't really matter. It's like 20 or 21.
I think it's 22.
I thought it was 22 too. Yeah. So she understands post-conviction. And when she says that the key to post-conviction litigating is to focus on what the evidence that the jury heard, okay, and I just like to harken back to the state's forensic expert, who Dr. Silkman can remind us of his name, who said on the stand it got Teresa Hallback's DNA on it. The bullet, the item FL, got Teresa Hallback's DNA on it when it went through her skull. Right, that's the evidence that the jury heard. I don't think anybody in the world knows post-conviction litigation better than Kathleen Zellner. So the question I have out to the chat, to the panel, is Kathleen Zellner wrong, or did the Wisconsin Court of Appeals get it wrong? That's because when they said it doesn't matter what he said, what's the correct answer? And if there's precedent in other states that says it matters what the jury heard, why is it that she didn't take this to a federal appeal and say, look, these laws are getting applied inconsistently, across different states, and at the federal level you have to reconcile because there has to be equal justice, right? Under the law, right? You can't have one thing decided one way here and another thing decided completely differently over here because it's supposed to be the same statute.
Correct. I believe it was Jensen who made that fundamental error on the stand regarding the blood of the decedent being present on the bullet. And it's rather remarkable. And the way Kathleen Zellner has approached this is the correct way. You need to undermine the state's case by deconstructing the forensic evidence. Because remember, this was a circumstantial case against Stephen Avery. They didn't use any of the testimony or of what Brendan Dassey said. Yet Jack 61 will point out very quickly, they used item FL and they used the hood latch swab, right? So it's really fruit from the poison tree. None of those items should have been introduced during the trial. And I believe that Judge Willis let so much go through. It was ridiculous. You have to wonder whether there was a judge there at all controlling what was happening. He had very little control. Kratz and co. were running the show. But this is the proper way to do it. You need to attack the forensic evidence, find the cracks, find the holes. Through her brilliant work and very simple, very elegant work, she totally deconstructed item FL. And as you know, and Jack 61 will back me up on this, item FL for the state, for Ken Kratz, was the game changer. The game changer. Because what it did, it allowed the state to say, see, Brendan Dassey was correct after all. Because even though we get said to him, who shot her in the head? Brendan said Stephen did. Well, lo and behold, we find shell casings, we find a bullet fragments. Oh, look at that. That bullet fragment has Teresa Halbach's DNA on it. So what it did was it allowed the state to close the loop as if to say, I told you that Teresa Halbach was there. Teresa Halbach was in Stephen's garage. Hence, he had to have killed her and he had to have done this in the presence of Brendan Dassey. What Kathleen Zellner has eloquently done is completely destroyed item FL, because now the state had looked at item FL and said, oh God, that's not the instrument. That's not the cause of Teresa Halbach's death. So what they've done is backpedaled and backtracked to the point where item FL plays no role. However, guys, you have to agree, it was used as the primary driving force during the trial that you could have heard a pin drop when the anthropologist was saying that the cause of death was homicidal violence. And look at this, guys. We've got 2 cranial bone fragments with beveling. And oh, Lord, we've got 2 bullet fragments in the garage. Boom. Mic drop. Everyone, if you're part of the jury, you're going, oh my God, it actually happened. They murdered Teresa Halbach. Kathleen Zellner just diffused one of the most important pieces of forensic evidence. What did the state do? Well, we never said it struck bone, and hence they walked away from item FL. Unbelievable. They used it during the court as a powerful tool against Stephen. And then after Kathleen Zellner proved it never struck bone, the state walked away. Guys, you can't even make this up.
Yeah, it was a really dirty trick. I think it was intentional. Jerry and Dean missed it. But when they pulled, a week before trial, and Gunn suggested that they pull everything associated with Brendan, that those pieces of evidence should have been withdrawn and not allowed in at court. I think they just flat missed it, because I don't know how you get it in there without Brendan being involved, because it was all gleaned after or on March 1st, because they were immediately in that garage, immediately. So,
well, the amazing thing is, Jack 61, remember Kratz did the press conference and he goes, now we know what we're looking for.
Yeah.
So
he tried to justify it.
Yeah. Are you trying to tell me that before, with all their crack investigators, they didn't know what to look for? and now, after a coerced confession, they now knew what to look for. To me, guys, they were fumbling in the dark. They were trying to invent a narrative that didn't exist. Their own crime scene forensic gurus and the cadaver and scent dogs told them, boys, nothing happened here. Do you agree, guys? Yes or no? Their own
100%.
told them
100% agree.
nothing happened here. Whatever happened, it wasn't here. They never listened.
right.
They had to invent a narrative.
Kratz knew that he had to place Teresa in that property somehow, some way, and I think that was the marching orders to this, as you call them, the crack team, and that's exactly what they did.
That's a great point that Doc makes. Imagine how embarrassing it would have been had they not found anything in the garage at all. I mean, they jackhammered the concrete because the blood would have to seep down the cracks, right? There was so much blood getting shot 10 times. That would have had to. They didn't find any. And imagine if they hadn't discovered item FL, they wouldn't have found anything. We know what we're looking for, right? We have to find something. If they'd gone in looking for something that they knew what they looked for and then didn't find anything, imagine how embarrassing that would be.
That's a great point there, Big Jeff. And what is consistent, and we've taken apart the entire case. We've taken apart the entire trial. We've looked at every piece of forensic evidence. And if you're looking at this objectively, without an agenda, you would conclude that Teresa Halbach, not one drop of her blood, not one drop of her DNA was found outside the RAV4. And now they're trying to introduce item FL, which is the only forensic item that has Teresa Halbach's DNA on it. Out of the entire Avery salvage yard, everywhere, there isn't one drop of her blood anywhere, right? And what chills me to the bone is what Tom Fassbender requested the lead DNA tech to do. Right, Jack 61, right, Big Jeff, right, Jeff, try to put her in his house or garage.
That's right.
Absolutely.
And I sent the pictures out to Luke Haig, our ballistics expert. He said that on the holes he's seen on the garage, those are exit holes.
Exit on the inside of the garage.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it means that those holes, if they're bullet holes, were created by somebody standing outside the garage, shooting in. Jim said it looked like somebody went on the west side. They picked up the fragment from behind that panel, and then they just took it over to the
37.
That is my gun. I can remember it by the scratches back here.
Okay, you're sure of that?
I am sure of that.
And where did you keep it when you lived there?
On the gun rack that was on the wall in the bedroom.
Okay. Did you ever use that gun on the property?
I fired that gun at chipmunks, and I fired that gun at targets all over the lot. I mean, I could have been standing in the back end of the lot, down by the far end of the lot. I fired it all over the yard.
What would you be shooting at?
More often than not targets, but targets of opportunity were gophers.
Did you ever fire that gun in the area of the garage?
I fired it all around the garage. I fired it all around the lot.
Can you give me any kind of estimate of how many times you would have fired that gun in front of you on that 1 acre parcel?
Maybe 5 or 6 bricks, which are 500 in a brick, 25, 3,000 times.
That is such an incredibly powerful statement, testimony that Roland Johnson did. That is so exculpatory. In any other case, that is so exculpatory for Stephen Avery. It hurts, right? Because it means now that the so-called murder weapon that the state are saying that Stephen had fired those 10 or 11 rounds into Teresa Halbach now brings in a huge element of doubt. Why? Because the freaking owner of the gun said that he had fired all around the Avery salvage yard, including the garage, 3,000 rounds. And the owner of the gun said where he keeps the gun, on the gun rack in Stephen Avery's bedroom, and the trailer is owned by Roland Johnson, not by Stephen Avery. So now the state are trying to say, don't worry about that. We're saying that Stephen fired 10 bullets or 11 bullets from that gun, killed Teresa Halbach, and as a good little fellow, he put the gun back on the gun rack. He didn't even hide the murder weapon. He let it out there like a trophy. So the jury must be thinking, wait a minute. If the owner of the gun is saying, hey, I fired all around the Avery salvage yard, shells get ejected from a rifle, as we know, and they go all over the place. So if you look at the weight of the evidence, does it suggest that Ida Maffel likely was shot by Roland Johnson, right? Rather than Stephen Avery? What is the weight of the evidence? The evidence favors the owner of the rifle had fired Ida Maffel and all the shells. And what did Stephen Avery used to say, Jack 61? He got upset because every time he mowed the lawn, the shells got struck by the blade of the lawnmower and shooting.
They're flying all over the damn place.
They're flying everywhere.
He needed a damn magnet. He needed a big old earth magnet to walk around out there in that yard and pick up where he was going to mow.
Correct. So is it surprisingly that you find empty shells in a garage? It's probably Stephen picking them up and chucking them in there, right? So this goes to show one important point. It's perception. How does the state sell Ida Maffel? How does it sell it to the jury? And that's by bullshitting, right? Ignore Roland Johnson, ignore the owner of the rifle. Stephen did it. Did they find any blood on the rifle? No. Yep. Did they find any DNA on the rifle? No. Did they actually fingerprint the rifle? No. They could not prove that Stephen had even touched the rifle, and yet they concocted this incredible story with no forensic evidence that Stephen had fired 10 or 11 bullets into Teresa Halbach. Unbelievable.
And they completely ignored the fact that they had been in and out of that garage from the 5th until the 12th. They were in there numerous times. How could they possibly miss? Because they, like you said, they picked up 10 or 11 shell casings on that day. And how could they miss these 2 fragments? They were there. They moved shit out of that garage. They were going to find something in that garage on March 1st. Guaranteed.
Correct. And there's a really interesting video that was taken on November the 6th. I don't know if you remember it, guys, in which 2 detectives or 2 law enforcement officers went in with a camera into Stephen Avery's garage, and they even zoomed near where the compressor was.
That's right.
And there's no bullet.
We've got that video.
There's no bullet fragments.
Nothing there.
Correct. And Kathleen Zellner, sorry guys, if I could just make one final point. Kathleen Zellner made a very important observation. There were entry bullet holes that went through the garage, through the wood paneling, right? So we now know what the detectives did with Ida Maffel. They picked up a bullet fragment and threw it under the compressor.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to what Rowley had said, go ahead, Big Jeff.
No, go ahead, Jeff, please.
I was just going to say, to go back to Rowley Johnson and the garage, and when I see that, okay, I started shooting guns when I was, 10 or something. When I see that garage and you say, I got a 22, what does the garage say to me? It's somewhere for me to lean against to shoot. That's what I see. I go, oh, this is how I can, stabilize my shot. So where are the shells going to end up if I use the garage as a stabilizer when I'm shooting a rabbit or a gopher or a target? They're going to end up on next to my feet, either in the garage, in the door, or next to the garage. That's my point. Like, finding all of these shell casings here, to me, it would make more sense than if you were standing out in the middle of the yard and you found a pile. You use buildings, you use structures as a stabilizer. You know, even a car, you sit next to a car. That's all I wanted to say. So just to go back to what Rolly Johnson was saying. Go ahead, Big Jeff. On to your comment.
Well, yeah, no, that's a great comment. My comment is I find it ironic. Rolly Johnson described how he kept the gun on that gun rack on top. We know that Stephen was not a hunter, right? I mean, he went to prison at a rather young age, and just the hunting bug just never bit him. And that gun was probably up on that rack like a prop, but we know he did file for a hunting license at one time. It's not clear that was the gun that he used, and he probably just went one time or so to try it out. But isn't it ironic that that's the gun that they used to charge him in his original arrest warrant, felon in the possession of a firearm? When first of all, he was exonerated, and Kratz actually had to go back and update the record to show that he still had an active felony charge, for the incident with his cousin. When really that thing was just more of a prop. I mean, that could have been a toy gun probably for all he knew. Just the way that Kratz used that for the original arrest is just slimy, typical sliminess from Ken Kratz.
Yes, and Mr. Kratz, I read it. I read the trial testimony. Mr. Kratz felt compelled that he had to file that charge. Did Mr. Kratz forget something? This is rural Wisconsin, right? This is rural Wisconsin. Do you know how many guns, weapons, and ammunition they pulled out from the Avery salvage yard? Jack 61, you want to make a comment on how many weapons they pulled out?
Oh my God, there was guns everywhere. Earl had guns, Bobby had guns, and Chuck had guns. There was guns in the shop. Alan Avery had guns. Jesus Christ, I would call it an arsenal, but they had a lot of guns there. And none of them were Steve's. Not one was Stephen's. Not one.
Not one of them belonged to Stephen. Stephen was literally surrounded by an armory of weapons and ammunition. Did you ever see Stephen Avery with a weapon in his hand anywhere? Did you ever see him show off with a gun or anything like that? Nothing.
Never.
Nothing.
Yeah, I think what Ken Kratz was able to remember, I mean, he was quite forgetful of a lot of things, but what he was able to remember was that Sheriff Kasurik's deposition was literally scheduled for a few days, or was it even two or 3 days from the arrest of Stephen Avery? So
one day.
One day. So it was very important to get Stephen in prison, to stop that deposition at all costs. You can never forget that this goes all the way back to 1985. So they had to trump up a charge, and that charge is felon in possession of a firearm. They needed him to go away. Don't ever forget that.
100% correct. And to make matters worse, the detectives were in there one day before they seized the gun. So they were aware that there were 2 weapons in Stephen Avery's bedroom, and they never touched the weapons. They never confiscated the weapons. Somebody told the detectives to go back in and get the guns. So it was deliberate. They knew, Ken Kratz knew, right, we got to nab Stephen, we got to nab him now. How were they going to do that? Through a weapons charge. That's how they did it.
All right, Big Jeff, it is that time of the show that we throw it on over to you for your wrap-up comments. We get the first little crack at episode 8. I don't want to check how many minutes we went into it, but it didn't seem like we got too far.
Well, that's not surprising because there was a lot of BS tossed out. And it all started with not only Brad Chimmel, but Ken Kratz saying, "Oh, what an insult this is to the family," and it just took off from there. So it's kind of not surprising that we didn't get too far into the episode, because we just have to address the bullshit when it comes up, and we have to take it apart a piece at a time. I think that the panel today did an outstanding job bringing up points and ripping, continuing to rip the state's case to shreds. So not a very long summary from me today, but I'm looking forward to seeing Kathleen's bullet experiment in the next episode.
Absolutely, Big Jeff. Like I said, they keep repeating things, falsehoods, so I will keep repeating facts. And that's, I guess, all we can do sometimes. Dr. Silkman, please give us your summation today. Lot said.
I really enjoyed this episode. For me, I really like when we examine the forensic evidence because it's done in a scientific manner, and hence we can evaluate the pros and cons of each piece of forensic evidence. So we're not giving an opinion here per se. We're looking at the experimental findings of the forensic evidence. And what I really like about this particular episode, I really admire Kathleen Zellner's approach, and that is to try and reproduce the forensic evidence. And what Kathleen Zellner found continuously, and her experts, is that she could not reproduce what the state said occurred. And this is very, very powerful, because if you're in the field of science, like I was for many years, when you do an experiment, the power of that experiment is if someone around the world can reproduce your results. In other words, can someone in another part of the world follow simple recipes and reproduce your findings in an experimental paper? If they can, that reinforces your conclusion. If they can't, it means that likely something wrong has occurred. I like Kathleen Zellner's approach. You take apart the forensic evidence. That's the way to do it, and that's the way to approach it. Really enjoyed the episode. Thank you, everyone.
Well, and again, thank you, Dr. Silkman, for your contribution. And Jack, I guess you have the last word today. So lead us out of episode 34.
Yeah, I mean, just to be brief, and where we started out earlier talking about these misdeeds and how it all came together. Basically, this is going back to Brad Schimmel and his always bringing in the hall box. That's all it got. This playing this emotion card, and that may be a fact that it's emotional, but that's not facts that have any real place in the trial as far as convicting someone, right? So I think you're right. They keep talking, going back to this. We keep spewing facts. That's what we should continue to do. And this is on the horizon, of course, of convicting a murderer, which is, headed our way here in a couple of months. So it's been good so far. Some really good conversation and reiterating and maybe even expounding upon what we've already said. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. So that's it for us today. This is Jeff Jones saying this has been Discussing a Murderer.